Good to be with you for this second devotional in our series on the book of Romans, where I think this week we'll probably only get through about the first half of the book. And given our time constraint, we're going to therefore prioritise the flow of Paul's argument rather than getting locked into too many details. Remember, Paul is defending the gospel message he preaches so that the Christians in Rome will adopt him as their link missionary and send him on to Spain. And Paul's flagged this in the introduction of his letter, and he's going to come back to it near the end. But for now, it's time to outline the content of this gospel message that he preaches. And as he does, he's going to defend himself against the criticism of his opponents, and at the same time, try to convince his readers of the truth of this gospel. The beginning point of Paul's message is to explain why we need a Saviour. Jesus' role as Saviour only makes sense when we recognise the extent and the seriousness of our sin. And so Paul begins at Romans 1 verse 18 with the sobering truth that sin stirs God's wrath. His holy anger is rightly fired up by our failure to treat him as his greatness and majesty demand. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God, nor gave thanks to him. But their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. So what actually is sin? The sin that attracts the wrath of God. It is to suppress our understanding of the reality and the presence of God, refusing to acknowledge him as God. And we see it every time someone denies their accountability to God. When a person says, look, God has no right to judge me, or when they say God doesn't exist, why should I worry about him? This is a denial of everything that can be known about God simply by looking at the world he has made. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim his works. But human beings choose not to listen. The beauty and the wonder of our world make it obvious that we have some kind of accountability to the one who made it all. So Paul begins first with the people who have only a general revelation of God in creation, and he shows how they're still answerable to God, still under his wrath. But it gets worse because the human heart is not a blank slate, but it's already predisposed to self-rule. God gives human beings over to sin. For all the alternatives to God that humans choose, God allows them to make those things their little gods. 3 times in Romans 2, we're told that God gives them over to their sin. He allows them to experience all the depravity of their choices. If you choose to read through chapter 2 for yourself later, notice the threefold giving over to sin in verses 24, 26 and 28. The result of this fundamental orientation away from God and towards self-referenced passion and desire, or what we might call doing our own thing, expressing our own identity, following our own path, that leads to dreadful results. They, that is human beings, have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed and depravity. They're full of envy, murder, strife, deceit and malice. They're gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. They have no understanding, no fidelity, no love, no mercy. Although they know God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do these very things, but they also approve of those who practice them. And at the end of that list, every self-righteous person wants to say, well, yes, exactly. That's exactly what those sinners are like. But right then, at the beginning of chapter 2, Paul takes out a mirror and he asks for some honesty. You, therefore, have no excuse, you who pass judgment on someone else. For at whatever point you judge another, you're condemning yourself, because you who pass judgment do the same things. Whenever we judge others, we run the risk, and perhaps the very high likelihood, of judging ourselves. When we say, I wish God would just take down those people or these people, that's when our judging of others could end up condemning us with very serious circumstances. But what about those who've had the benefit of a special relationship with God, those who've grown up as part of the people of Israel with the scriptures as their guide? Surely they are God's chosen. Surely they are the ones God has revealed to himself in the past. And so what about the Jews? Surely they're not under the same judgment as all the rest. Well, Paul has some more sad news. All who sin apart from the law will also perish apart from the law, and all who sin under the law will be judged by the law. For it is not those who hear the Lord who are righteous in God's sight, but it is those who obey the law who will be declared righteous. So it seems that the law-abiding Jew is going to be okay, all right? All they've got to do is obey the law of Moses, which sounds easy enough, right? Circumcision, sacrifice, and a good heritage in Israel might just do it, perhaps. But the problem is that with all the privilege, the earnest Jew does not actually keep the law of Moses. Turns out that everyone is under the power of sin, both the religious and the irreligious, both the Jew and the Gentile. Now, eventually, Paul sums up God's condemnation of all people with a series of stinging Old Testament quotes. As it is written, there is no one who is righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands. There is no one who seeks God. All have turned away. They have together become worthless. There is no one who does good, not even one. Their throats are open graves. Their tongues practice deceit. The poison of vipers is on their lips. Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Ruin and misery mark their ways, and the way of peace they do not know. There is no fear of God before their eyes. This is a terrible condemnation of us all before a holy God. And just in case we were wondering about whether our feeble efforts at doing good might just scrape us into God's good books, Paul concludes in verse 20, therefore no one will be declared righteous in God's sight by works of the law. Rather, through the law, we become conscious of sin. See, it turns out the ultimate effect of the law of Moses is to leave us without any excuses. There's no way around our own sin. Outside the law, we are condemned by our willful ignorance of God, and under the law, we're condemned by our failure to keep the whole law. There seems no avoiding the righteous judgment of God. I'm tempted to stop for a quiet moment at this point, just so that we can feel the weight of this terrible judgment standing against us and against every other man, woman, and child who has ever lived. I'm tempted, but I dare not, because Paul has something to say in the next verse that is stunning. But now, apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been made known, to which the law and the prophets testify. This righteousness is given through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. There's no difference between Jew and Gentile, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and all are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that came by Jesus Christ. So not depending on our obedience to the law, that is, apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been made known. He demonstrates that he himself is right and just in his action of saving the person who puts their faith in Jesus Christ, entirely consistent with his covenant promises and character of the Old Testament. The Jew-Gentile distinction no longer matters, because all have sinned and failed in their vocation of bearing the image of God. All have sinned, but now, outside of full obedience to the law of Moses, God justifies the guilty by his grace through the redemption that came by Jesus Christ. The gospel is good news. It's brilliant news and especially wonderful when we know our desperate need for a Saviour. Let me pause here so that you have opportunity to give God thanks for his outrageous grace to us all in Jesus Christ.